Today I'm going to show you a fully comprehensive guide on how to use remote events. Now, remote events in the simplest way I can describe is just a way of communicating from the server to the client and from the client to the server. And if you don't know what I mean, I'm going to break it down for you now. So think of the client as the player, or think of it as your screen, almost what you're watching this video on. You might be at this specific time in the video, but someone else might actually be 10 seconds ahead. And there's a reason you're not seeing the same thing at the same time, and that is because you are each separate client. You are a client. Whereas think about if I was live streaming, that is set on the server, so everybody gets to see that at the exact same time. That is pretty much the principle for client and server boundaries. So whatever happens on the client stays on the client, and whatever happens on the server gets spread out amongst all players and everybody can see it. Now, it is good sometimes to keep things on the client side of the boundary. Maybe you want a GUI to pop up for a certain player, maybe you have some specific little admin tools that let you have a free cam around the world. There is a really good use for being on the local side of the boundary. But in general, a lot of the time you want things to be on that server side of the boundary because you want all of the players to experience the same thing at the same time. And that is where remote events come in handy. So we can actually transfer information from our client over to our server and from our server to our client, which can be incredibly useful when you're trying to script GUIs, when you're trying to maybe get the location of a player's mouse and you just want to check with the server if that's all okay. If they've clicked on a certain spot, you're going to do something. There's so many different possibilities. But how do you actually make a remote event? Well, it's super simple. And the number one rule is that remote events always live in replicated storage. I don't really know why, but it's just a simple place for them to go. It's a very good place just to keep them. You don't really want them in server script service since they're not a script. You don't want them in server storage since it would just take up unnecessary storage on your server. So the best bet is to put it in replicated storage. So all you have to do is just click on that little white plus and you can just add a remote event. Call it whatever you want and you're all good to go. But how do you actually use a remote event? Well, it's super simple. I'm going to show you exactly how to do it. I'm going to pull one example on the local side of things, aka the client, and another side on the server side of things. So let's hop straight into it. So I have this super simple script here that is in my starter player scripts. It's called local spawn part, and all it does is it spawns a part on the player's mouse position. So if we actually go in our game and we test it out, just keep in mind that this is a local script. So whenever I actually click, you can see it spawns the part wherever I want it to. And so you can see as the client, this is all appearing on my screen. But if I head onto our server, you can see that the parts aren't actually there at all. And this is because when we're working with local scripts, everything happens locally on the client. So in order to actually process that information through the server, we would need to use a remote event. So I'm going to show you an example now. We're going to work this out together. The goal is pretty much to hook this local script up to our server script and then process the information on the server instead of the client. So all the players in the server will be able to see our parts being placed. So I already have my remote event placed in replicated storage, and I'm just going to head back into this local script that I created earlier. And I'm just going to delete this function since we're not going to need it. I'm going to keep these two lines here because we do need these. These are our sort of prerequisites that we're actually going to be using in our script. But another prerequisite we need to add is actually our event, because we need something to call in order to send this information off to the server. So we're simply going to say local event equals game get service replicated storage dot my event, or whatever you've named it. So now we actually have our event, we can start working with it. And the way we do it is by using the fire server and on server event function and method. So for this example, we're going to be using fire server since we want to send the information off to the server, and then the server side script will receive it, process it, and do whatever we want with it. So since I'm working with the mouse and I want the player to be able to click and then it spawns something, I'm going to be using the mouse.button1up function. And essentially all that means is once the player's left mouse button is released, it's going to process this function. So we're going to say connect function. And first of all, we need to get the position of the mouse. So we're going to say local mouse position equals mouse.hit.position. And all mouse.hit does is it simply returns where the player has clicked, where the player's position is on their screen, and it translates it to 3D world space. And then .position simply gets the 3D vector of that position. And then all we need now is one more line, and that is just to fire the event so that it can be sent off to the server and it can process it. So we're just going to say event : fire server. Now, this would work. If we just fired it now, it's just going to spawn randomly in the middle of the world space, but we want it to spawn on our mouse's position. So that's where we can utilize parameters. Now, if you don't know what a parameter is, essentially anything that's between these brackets is called a parameter. When you call a function, that's a parameter. So with remote events, we can actually use them for extremely good purposes. You can send information that you want over to the server and then call it back on the server. So like for this one, we're simply going to put in our variable mouse position. And all that's going to do is once we fire the server, we'll actually be able to use this when we call our on-server event method. So that's our local script done. We can just leave that how it is. I'm going to head into server script service and create a new script. I'm going to call this server underscore spawn part, so we can just tell the difference between, delete the default text, and then we first need to get our event. We're going to say local event equals game get service replicated storage dot my event, and then we need to call the on server event function, which is a lot easier than you'd imagine. All we have to say is event dot on server event connect function. And you can see up here in the little dialog prompt box that it's actually saying we have a player argument. And that may be a little bit confusing to you because we didn't pass along a player argument. All we passed along was the mouse position. Here's where the trick comes in, and this took me a long time to figure out. Whenever you actually fire from the server, the first argument that it sends is the player's object, and then the second argument it sends is the mouse's position. So actually we're going to pass two parameters in here, and I don't know why they did this, but it's super sneaky and very hidden, and it took me so long to figure it out, but it's really easy now that I understand it. So what we're going to say here is we're going to say player, mouse position. So we've got the mandatory player argument that we have to add, and then the mouse position, which is the mouse position that we sent over here. So always remember that whenever you're doing an on-server event method, the first argument will always be the player who sent it, and the second argument or third argument or fourth argument will be the information that you've sent across. Then we're just going to go between these two end brackets and open up our function. So what we've essentially said here is once this event has been fired, then we're going to connect our function and we're going to get our player and our mouse position that we got from the client beforehand. So now we have everything we need, we can actually do something with it. So let's make our part. We're going to say local part equals instance.new part, and then part.parent equals workspace. If we made a new part instance, it would automatically be added to the server script service folder, just simply because that's where our script is, and it just sort of defaults to wherever the script is. And then we can actually utilize our mouse position argument that we passed through beforehand. So we can say part.position equals mouse position. And there you go. That's all you need in order to actually process something from the local script to a server script. It's really that simple. So now if we head into our game, and now if I click somewhere, you can see that a part actually spawns. And if we check on the server now, you can see that that part's actually there, it's in our workspace, and all the other players on our game will be able to see it. Now, there is another side to this boundary, which is sending from the server to the client, and that works pretty much the exact same way as well. So to send something from the server to the client, all you would do is you'd say event fire client, but then the difference is you actually have to provide the player's object before you send it, because fire client simply sends this remote event to a very specific client. If you want it to send to all clients, you can use the fire all clients function and simply pass through whatever parameters you want. But just remember, if you are going to fire to the client, you need to get their player name somehow. Most of the time you would do that by maybe getting it once they joined, simply by doing the function game.players.player added connect function player, and then moving your event fire client in here and putting the player object in the parameters. Then in your local script, you would simply say event dot on client event connect function, and then you can simply do whatever you want on the client side. So for example, if I want a part to spawn on the player's head that no one else can see, I would simply say local part equals instance.new part, and then I would actually need to get the player, so it would be local player equals game.players.local player. Then you need to get the player's character, which will be local character equals player.character or player.character added weight, and then we actually need to set the part's parent because we don't want it spawning in starter player scripts, we want it spawning in the workspace. So we're going to say part.parent equals workspace, and then we actually need to finally change the position, so we're going to say part.position equals character.head.position plus vector3.new 0, 1, 0. And all this line does is it applies the parts position to the character's head and adds a stud on top, so it's just a little bit above the player. So now if we head into our game, this should work fully, and you can see that once we spawn in, the part is added to our player's head and all is good. And if we look on the server side, you'll see that the part is only visible for the player and not for the server or anyone else. So that has been it for this tutorial. I hope it really helped you. If it did, please make sure to like and subscribe. Make sure to leave a comment, or if you have any concerns or your code isn't working, please let me know. We have a Discord server you can join as well. And make sure to join the Roblox group as well, because you get a nice role as well in our Discord server. So yeah, I will see you all later. Goodbye.